Audio Jungle.
Welcome to the special segment on Man vs. Wildlife, Bobcat Edition. Increased bobcat populations across the country have caused heightened public concern. Today we will be exploring this topic in more detail with the input of various experts on this issue. And now to Megan in the field. Megan?
Hi, we're here in Lansing, Michigan, where construction is about to begin on a new highway that will connect two of the major interstates in this area. Highway 99 and Interstate 96. While the highway will make the morning commute much quicker for some, there are others who are concerned about the ways construction may affect local wildlife populations. I'm here with conservation ecologist Emily Devard, who is specifically concerned about the effect this new roadway may have on local bobcat populations. Thank you for joining us, Emily. Of course, Megan. Now, it's difficult for the everyday person to imagine the effect that a roadway might have on the environment, especially when it does not seem like it would hurt the human population. Can you explain to us a little of your concerns?
Absolutely, Megan. Well, one way we assess ecosystem health is by looking at diversity within wildlife populations of an area, especially of large mammals. As humans, we tend to have an anthropocentric view, and we forget that we share a world with wildlife. When we make major decisions that affect geography, it's important for us to consider how these changes will impact the wildlife in the area, who have just as much of a right to the land as we do. I'm specifically worried about the bobcat population. Here in Michigan, we have a large bobcat population, and we have to consider how building this roadway will affect this species. There have been studies in California that have found that building a freeway limited bobcat diversity. We need to take this into consideration as we consider building this roadway here.
So how would building a highway affect the genetic diversity of the bobcat population? Are you worried that bobcats will be hit by cars?
Direct mortality due to vehicle collision is certainly an issue. However, I'm more concerned about how this new highway will affect bobcat populations on a larger scale, not just the individual basis. My main concern is habitat fragmentation. This is an issue because it affects not just the individual, but the entire population of bobcats, as well as other species. It affects the ways that they disperse, their habitat availability, the ability to find a mate, as well as many other things. To assess population health, we use genetic monitoring. We specifically look at genetic differentiation, which is the genetic differences between populations or individuals, and gene flow, which is the alternation of the frequencies of alleles of particular genes in a population, resulting from interbreeding with organisms from another population having different frequencies. We can use population genetics to look at many different things, including abundance, geographical range, population size and structure, migration, and more. And these all impact the ways in which we should manage wildlife and approach the conservation of these species and the habitats that they live in.
Wow, that sounds really complex. Let's go back to the studio with Mimi and geneticist Cassandra Kranz to tell us more detail about the different ways that genetic monitoring is performed. Thank you, Emily, and back to you, Mimi.
I wonder what it belongs to. I should use my book. Cats, footprints, trails, nothing about poop. Darn it! How am I ever supposed to identify scat if my book doesn't tell me?
Have you ever been discouraged by your inability to identify an animal based on its scat? Have we got a product for you? A Pocket Naturalist Guide, Animal Tracks, and Scat. An introduction to the tracks and signs of the familiar North American species. Let's check it out.
What do you think it belongs to? Look, it looks like it belongs in the cat family.
Thank you, Megan. I'm here with geneticist Dr. Cassandra Kranz, who has done work with genetic monitoring and is familiar with the different processes that can be used. Dr. Kranz, can you please tell us more about this?
Yes, there are a couple
couple of different ways that geneticists and conservation ecologists can work together in order to track gene flow between and within populations. Oftentimes, mitochondrial DNA or microsatellite loci are examined in order to determine gene distribution. These types of DNA are used because they are very similar within a population. Recently, genetics has taken a more prominent role in determining the different bobcat populations. Geneticists are able to isolate DNA from tissue samples and then compare microsatellites between different populations. Microsatellites are useful because they are tandem repeats of polymorphic DNA sequences, meaning that the pattern is of considerable length. These polymorphic sequences are flanked by unordered DNA that allows for primers to bind to the specific location, which further specifies the unique microsatellite region. They are useful for population genetics because they show signs of inbreeding, which indicates population size, and are useful for tracking individual populations.
And where does the DNA come from, Dr. Krantz?
Well, the DNA can actually be harvested from blood samples that can be collected when a bobcat gets caught in a trap, or even hair and scat samples in some cases. This DNA can then be amplified in order to compare between and within populations. Polymerase chain reaction, or PCR as it's better known, is a process that is often used with mitochondrial DNA, by which many copies of a single fragment of DNA can be made in order to create a large amount that can be analyzed. And in fact, there can often be difficulties with transporting samples in order to amplify and analyze them due to restrictions associated with the transport. Therefore, scientists who are looking for new ways to quickly amplify a whole genome have begun using a process called strand displacement reaction with a DNA polymerase enzyme that can be accomplished amplification even more quickly.
Wow, that's amazing that genetic monitoring can even be done. Do you know just how quickly the process can be accomplished, Dr. Krantz?
Yes, as a matter of fact. Actually, using the method with a strand displacement reaction and a DNA polymerase, 48 complete individual genomes of felid species were able to be amplified in less than 3 days. In addition, this process can be used in samples up to 19 years old. Once the DNA has been amplified, it can then be analyzed and compared. This is often how genetic monitoring is approached.
Wow, that's fantastic that process can now be completed so efficiently and that population genetics can be followed. Thank you so much, Dr. Krantz, for teaching us more about genetic monitoring and the ways in which it can be accomplished. Now we will go back to Megan in the field with conservation ecologist Emily. Back to you, Megan.
Wow, thank you for that. Emily, now that we understand more about how genetic monitoring can be done, can you tell us why we should be considering genetic monitoring on the local bobcat population here in Michigan?
Genetic monitoring allows us to assess genetic variability, which is necessary for evolutionary success. We can use it to characterize a population, including its range, abundance, size, and structure, and we can also analyze the variability of a specific phenotypic or molecular trait.
So what do we do with all this genetic data that we're collecting then?
Well, Megan, bobcat populations are not just distributed on a state-by-state basis. They don't obey state lines. They disperse to other states and areas. This is one reason why population genetics is so important. We have to manage for a species not just within each individual state, but we have to monitor the entire population. Population genetics allows us to determine abundance, range, variation, and other traits of the species that will inform how we should manage this whole population, not just within this one state.
So what should management aim to do?
Well, Megan, in preventing the building of this new highway, we want to conserve gene flow in the population of bobcats. Building this road would create a physical barrier, preventing dispersal and isolating subpopulations of bobcats. Building this roadway could potentially lead to allopatric speciation, or the isolation of one portion of the population by some physical barrier that renders the new population incapable of producing offspring with the original population. However, more likely, building this road would create a sort of island effect, where there's lower genetic variation. This is concern for management because isolated populations with reduced genetic diversity have an increased risk of extinction. We need our populations of bobcats to maintain the ability for adaptation, something critically necessary if environmental conditions change at all. If we care about wildlife and bobcats in this area, we will not build this roadway.
Okay, well, that's definitely something to consider. Thank you very much, Emily. Now back to Mimi in the studio.
Here in Lansing, Michigan, there have been an increasing number of reports that illegal poaching is occurring. And here to tell us a little bit more on the problem and to elaborate on the policies and regulations in our very own Michigan state is DNR Conservation Officer Elise Steigerton. Elise?
Hi, thanks for having me. Like you said, I'll mention a little bit about our policies and about how our state is divided. We're divided into the Upper Peninsula and Lower.
The Upper Peninsula is divided into Units A and B, and the Lower into Units C and D.
The time frames that you can hunt in the Upper Peninsula are December 1st through February 1st. And then the Lower Peninsula is December 10th through the 20th. Within this regulation, there's also, in the Lower Peninsula, you're only allowed to hunt on private property. And you are only allowed to kill one bobcat in each unit. You're not allowed to kill your allotted two in one unit. So you can't kill two in any of the four, but you can kill one in each. And these restrictions have been implemented so that we can preserve the population size of bobcats. This is important because they are shrinking in Michigan, as we talked about, and they are in need of protection to maintain a good population size and to maintain genetic diversity, which is crucial to their survival.
So how can you tell if illegal poaching has occurred?
Oh, that's a good question. It has been researched a lot, and they have used microsatellites and mitochondrial DNA that shows a difference in population genetically. In a study that they found that there are differences between the West and then a East Midwest region. And they found this by using 8 different microsatellites that they found with 4 bobcat primers and 4 domestic cat primers. And these showed that there is a genetic difference between populations. And we've used this in our poaching methods. So when people say they've killed a bobcat in either the Upper or Lower Peninsula, we check the genetic information that we have, and we're able to tell if they actually killed it in the upper or lower. And our data shows that people are actually killing bobcats in the lower when they kill them in the upper. And this is a problem because we really do want to maintain their population sizes and the genetic diversity.
Right, definitely. Well, thank you very much, Elise. This has been our special segment of Man vs. Wildlife, Bobcat Edition. If you would like to learn more, please visit our website at www.bobcatsrule or text Save the Bobcats to 630-752-5000. Thank you so much for joining us.
Join us next week for Man vs. Wildlife, Blanding's Turtle Edition.